already heard our interesting information on Dr. Bill Van Patten, but I'll read it one more time. He's an award-winning scholar, teacher, and writer with an international presence in the field of pole dancing. I'm sorry. An international presence in the field of second language acquisition. I was just trying to one-up Steve. He is a professor of Spanish and second language studies at Michigan State University. He researches and teaches in the area of linguistics and psycholinguistic approaches to second language acquisition. Among teachers, he is known for his reader-friendly books, Making Communicative Language Teaching Happen, and From Input to Output, A Teacher's Guide to Second Language Acquisition, as well as his textbooks in Spanish and French. He is also the host of the wildly popular his internet podcast, Tea with BVP. When not engaged in these activities, Van Patten writes fiction and used to perform stand-up comedy. You just wonder why he's no longer doing that. Actually, he's taking a show, he's putting a show together, taking it on the road. I can't wait for that. So, I just want to explain the format of today's roundtable. I'm going to start with just a couple of questions. We'll have our panelists answer those questions, and then interspersed throughout, we will take questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, raise your hand high, and be patient as I run swiftly and carefully down the stairs, carrying the microphone. And the gentlemen upstairs, I'm sure, will indicate to me when they have found a second microphone for us. Okay, so the first question is a real easy one. Here it is. I have been incorporating TPR, then TPRS, and now CI into my classroom. I keep crawling back into the textbook. What are the key elements of selling CI to my students, administrators, and community? And I'm going to tell you what the key elements are. They were presented to you this morning, and they'll be presented to you all week long. If our speakers have anything they want to add to that question, they're more than welcome to address it, but we only have 1 hour for our roundtable. Speakers? Oh, yes.
A lot of the work in the last 40 years has been my failure to cause change in any part of education in the United States. I've been involved in campaigns of phonics, bilingual education, second language acquisition, the Common Core, say, and I failed in all of them, so I'm an expert on public relations and how to make those opinions. Let me tell you what Bertram Russell said about this in 1960. He wrote a very nice article in the journal Science about the responsibility of the atomic scientists, nuclear fallout and all this. How do we get to the public? He said there are 3 ways of doing it. First, you can go to the media. And we do this, some of you know, letters to the other, etc., on all these issues. That's limited because reporters have constraints. They've got to get their article done. They're rarely experts in education. It's the last thing they're interested in. They want to move up to sports. And sometimes the newspaper has a bias. But we should do everything. Second is you go to politicians. And you argue your case so the laws don't get changed in such a way that they can't do TPRS and other things. That's limited. It's been pointed out by Bertrand Russell that politicians get their advice from people on their staff who tell them what they think they should hear. So I try politicians. Oh my, whenever there's something coming up that has to do with education, I always write to my local state senators because that's education. And either it's no response or you get one of those letters, your call is very important to us. Right? But I keep doing that anyway. Bertrand Russell says we have to go to the public immediately, directly. We can do it better than he could. We have the internet. The internet where we can publicize our students' experiences. Bill and I were talking about this, about getting the word out. Is there evidence for the TPRS works? And Bill said, just look at what Yes, the complicated rate research that Bill and I do, but also on the internet reports of students, reports of teachers. Keep doing it, keep talking about it, and we will change the world. I think this is the real path.
The big one. What is ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages? What is ACTFL's position on TPRS and CI in general? It seems like they are afraid to say that TPRS is an accepted way of teaching.
Well, after this year, we'll be invited to ACTFL. No, I'm just kidding. I have a very good working relationship with ACTFL. They're publishing my book this November. If you're there, come by the booth. I'm excited. Yeah, so they're making some changes. So. But that was just a plug of my book. Yeah, he just read the manuscript. Oh my God! It's like last call at a singles bar. Oh my God! I thought I was sitting next to Jake Gyllenhaal. Okay, anyway, so ACTFL, like many organizations, so it's not peculiar to ACTFL. So what I'm about to say is not ACTFL specific. It's almost all organizations that language-related do this. They give kind of a lip service to comprehensible input and the role of input in acquisition. And you can see it by the way they talk about core practices. In fact, we'll be talking about this at a panel in November in Boston about what are core practices and how do we want to look at them and how do we want to research them. And one of the things in core practices is 90% language use and comprehensible input in the classroom. But it's not really clear what they mean by that, okay? And so when you look at everything else that's compounded on top of that, like feedback and push output and making students talk in the beginning and all these kinds of things, you go, well, wait a second, you can't do this on the one hand and then say this on the other. So it's not quite clear to me what the stand really is on these organizations. And again, it's not just ACTFL, almost all of our teaching organizations are like that. I don't know where they stand on something like TPRS, but I think that there's what's the word, Steve? There's a certain amount of eclecticism that organizations like to cling to because they are political entities. And so they need to be able to say things in certain ways so that they talk to as broad a group as possible. And so I think that's why you see comprehensible input and the role of input in the classroom be part of what they talk about, but not the central part, the way we want to talk about it.
I want to tell you one item that I learned from looking at the draft of Bill's book. The comprehensible input, the way it's been applied, has been this is Bill's insight, has been overlayered on old-fashioned grammar techniques. This is, you want some gossip? Tell me that. This is why I left Natural Approach. Natural Approach was doing great, but then after Tracy passed away, the publisher wanted the Natural Approach textbooks, like this one of those, to have a grammatical syllabus. These are simply ways of contextualize grammar, because it would help textbook sales. And that's why I left, of course. The resistance comes from one fact. If TPRS is right, these comprehensible approaches are right, the textbook industry is turned upside down. That is their problem.
So there are two questions that really tie into this really well. And so I'm going to start with the following. There are many leaders in second language acquisition, from department leaders, school district leaders, and consultants who say that you should never use just one method, such as TPRS. What I understand is that TPRS is made up of different strategies. It seems like we are being advised we should use TPRS or CI, or we shouldn't, because it's too focused on one strategy, and we are being encouraged to use games and student-centered activities in place of comprehensible input. What do you advise? So the one thing that I'll say before I pass the microphone off is that why at iFLT and other conferences, we share other strategies as well. The key is comprehensive input. And the approach that you use to interact with this comprehensible input is really up to you. We all know brains crave novelty. You can't work around that. And story asking and TPRS invented by Blaine Ray is an amazing approach. But we all know when you do the same thing the same way every single day, students tend to drop out. That's why we focus on a myriad of activities, and that is why you see all the different sessions on the menu today for the rest of the week.
I have said several times I'm not a big believer in methods. And all my courses that I have changed, every time I moved to a new institution, I changed the title of the course from Methods of Teaching X to Foundations of X. So, for example, when I moved to Michigan State, the course is now called Foundations of Language Teaching that I teach every fall. And that's not because I'm opposed to any particular method. What I'm opposed to is there are some methods over the years that have been propagated that have been, I think, quite misguided. And I think that's what people are responding to. So when you look at the plethora of methods over the years, you can think back, oh, that was a bad idea, you know, or that didn't work. But something like TPRS does, just like some others do, that are comparable in the sense of what they put at the center of the curriculum. Okay? And so I think what you have people doing is responding to that idea of, we know that these other things didn't work back. Okay, ready for this? This happened to me at a conference recently in Miami. I was doing this panel called The Conspiracy Against Language Acquisition and What to Do About It. That was the name of the panel, right? Good title. And so this young man, very nice young man, after we did our brief presentations, we opened up for a discussion, said, well, you know, in my courses that I've taken, we've learned that it doesn't make any difference what you do because students learn anyway. And I said, whoa, hold the phone, can we talk about, we couldn't do the whole thing here, so I talked to him in the hallway afterwards. And so there's a sense that somehow if you're focused and principled, that you must be doing something wrong. And so what I suggest you do is keep doing what you're doing, but also talk about the principles that guide what you do. And make people deal with your principles. Because it's the principles that underlie any good method. And that's all I'm going to say about it, Steve.
Yes. The underlying theory, the principles, is what counts. And the underlying theory, of course, is comprehension. And there's a small peripheral role for conscious knowledge of language. It's hard to do. It's hard to learn the rules, hard to apply them, etc. So, once again, the millionth time, I'm not against grammar. It's just that it's limited, it's hard to use, etc. Now, when we talk about comprehensible input, there's beginning level, there's an intermediate, advanced. Beginning are a multitude of methods. TPR, natural approach, TPRS are the ones we know best, of which TPRS is exciting, most exciting. And we all combine it with other things, with elements of natural approach, and especially TPR. I went to Jason Fritz's workshop last week in Africa, and it was using TPRS for teaching classroom management. Here's what we're doing, etc. The intermediate methods, content-based, pre-voluntary reading, are also comprehensible input-based. In terms of teaching principles, I think this is our major responsibility for two reasons. Three reasons. We want to justify our pedagogy. We also want our students to continue improving after they left class. We don't need return business. For example, once you reach the intermediate level, you should be able to make progress on your own. I am intermediate in Spanish exactly, and it's very interesting. You don't need a class. But I know that I should be reading, and I should talk to friendly people, and watch TV programs that I can understand, etc. So I have the idea of the theory, I'm autonomous. And the third is when our students leave class, they can tell mommy and daddy about it. And mommy and daddy might be on the board of education. Who knows? The exciting thing that happened at dinner last night, we had a nice conversation giving people bits and pieces of the theory as we go. I got the idea of watching Brenda Lee work and how she explained what she did to her students. These are the ground ones. Like you say, okay, my job is to speak and help you understand what I'm saying. I want to try to make you stand every word. Your job is to listen and don't repeat after me. That's most of the theory right there. That's it. So the idea is to get a lot of these short statements over time, and by the time the kids reach the advanced level, they didn't even read some of the papers. And then when someone says, you know, how come you're not doing this? Well, there's Jones and Smith, 1942, and Smith and Jones, 1968. And they looked at classes and they found blah, blah, blah. And that coincides with this case history. So we can then at least investing in our future, getting other people to understand it.
So with this pop-up theory, I'm just curious, when we talk about grammar instruction and in TPRS and different CI approaches, we'll give students what we call a 15-second grammar explanation. We call it pop-up grammar. So are you saying that this pop-up theory is similar to that?
Pop-up grammar is one of the great ideas from you guys. It's wonderful. And it can be used for both monitor rules and language appreciation. Language appreciation, my breakthrough came, Carol and I got it at the same time we were in Linda's class, and she stopped the discussion and said, by the way, Carol doesn't use the infinitives, we just string verbs. No one in the class cared except me and Carol. We thought that was the most interesting thing anybody could say. It doesn't make you a better speaker, but it's language appreciation. The S means past tense, the O means past tense, etc. I think it's a wonderful breakthrough. This is in addition.
I just have to piggyback on this because when I got to Michigan State and I overhauled the curriculum, and we got rid of testing, which I can talk about later if you want, we got rid of the focus on grammar, got rid of these things. Guess what disappeared from the class? Questions about grammar. I observe it in classes now, and I have my TAs and my instructors videotapes. I have to watch their 2 videotapes every spring, and my assistant watches all the classes in the fall. I never see a student anymore ask a question about grammar. I never see a student say, is this going to be on the quiz? The dynamics have changed. And so this idea of a pop-up, when it's useful, necessary, or just plain interesting, is the way to go. And so I think that as we start to change all these things, and people see what happens in the dynamic of the classroom, that will start to get some more results in terms of student engagement and interest.
Wow, great. So, sort of along the same thread, someone wrote in, my colleagues think that TPRS is not a comprehensible input method. And it's not comprehensible input because it includes some translation. However, they use translation in some of their activities, but not all the time. Translation is mostly used to establish meaning. When is it okay to use translation?
Communication, expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning in a given context. Your classroom is a particular context. You use translation when it facilitates the negotiation of meaning, pure and simple.
Repeat it one more time.
Oh my God, you're a lot of podcasts, don't you? I hate to be the escort that finds everything. Oh my God, okay. So communication is the expression, interpretation, and negotiation of meaning in a given context. This is why I do definitions, why I talk about this kind of stuff. Your class is a particular context, right? With certain kinds of speakers and certain kinds of non-speakers or beginning speakers, whatever you want to call them, right? And so translation is appropriate whenever it facilitates the negotiation of meaning. That's it. If it's not necessary, don't do it. If in that split second, if it facilitates the negotiation of meaning, you can move. Because what's important is this expression, interpretation of meaning. Okay? That's what's going on. And so translation is useful when it helps. But it doesn't end it.
Try to relax a little. Come on, your shell. It's okay. Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Any questions popping up in the audience? At any time you're in. Oh, there we go. Watch. Just kidding.
Okay. Well, one thing that stuck out to me listening to a Tivoli episode was talking about how it wasn't authentic communication to say practice having students be in the situation of going to a restaurant. Would you all say that doing a TPRS story about people in the restaurant would be able to kind of overcome that limitation and help students acquire language that would then be useful in the restaurant, real context when they experience that?
Let's make sure that we distinguish between those phony fake role plays that a lot of people like to do in class, just to practice the language, as opposed to building a story from comprehensible input where students are engaged in co-constructing that meaning. Those are two separate things, okay? And so if you want to construct a story that takes place in a restaurant and you do it the TPRS way, then you are doing something that's going to be useful. But if you're going to do a role play where I'm the waiter and you're the client and your job is to order this meal and at the end all I say to you is, muy bien, bien hecho, you did a good job, okay, sit down. I mean, those are completely different things, okay? So, so authenticity, again, the classroom is a context. Storytelling is authentic for that context. Role playing is kind of weird because it's not a drama class, right? That's what I think.
Okay, we have one more question. Thanks for being in the front.
Oh, I was actually asking for you, but I can ask a question.
Yeah, you got respond on the question.
Okay. I mean, this is
I want you to turn and
yeah.
tell them your name.
Hi, I'm Ryan. So, from my understanding, one of the things that you said about the question concerning high frequency vocabulary was that there was not really a need to teach it necessarily because it's high frequency. It should come out naturally. But is there a problem when we try to focus on high frequency vocabulary? Is there a byproduct that we're just looking for? And do you want to know high frequency?
You just come here, you run up and down. For those of you who've been on the falling.
Thank you, Brian. This is a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. It's not me telling you anything about other great materials. And that's how I get away with a lot of stuff. It's a conjecture. It's just a weak hypothesis. That's how science works. My hypothesis is that if you give people lots of comprehensible input, what Krashen calls I+1, confuse the hell out of everybody, is always there. You don't have to program. I was looking at research on language experience, which was used 50 years ago. Kids dictate stories. The high frequency words are there, the same ones that are in the basic readers. So my prediction is if we make up stories that we think are interesting and applicable to the kids, and we let the vocabulary roll out of the stories, it's going to be there. That's my prediction. And we can test it. We can look at the vocabulary that emerges naturally from pure TPRS classes where they don't consult this and see if the words are there. The only thing I'm concerned with, will students reach the level where at least some real world input is comprehensible? And I say yes, they may not get every single word, but eventually they're going to get all of it. That's the hypothesis. Again, it needs to be tested.
So also read the non-targeted input paper at sdcrashen.com. Did you get that? The case for non-targeted input. You have to say it like this. Yes.
You call it non-targeted? We're going to be a big shot. Just like this. Being on the stage with Bill Van Tappen someday. Does that sound cool? Make up one term. And the terminology here. Non-targeted is perfect. No one has any clear idea of what they mean by it. The article, so they think they're a lot smarter than they are. So they make an article on non-targeted comprehensible, but see if you can figure it out.
Great. So I don't know if you can zoom in, but I just want you to see the middle question. It's just very short. It's one line, and it's directed to Dr. Krashen. Dr. Krashen, do you really believe all that stuff you've published?
Well, I didn't believe it when I wrote it. Reading it over again, I find it so convincing.
Sorry?
I have to comment on this because I told Steve this little anecdote and I didn't get the chance to finish it before we started. And I just had a new PhD student graduate making this wonderful papers together on Japanese, actually. And she is a big SLA type person who does a lot of work with universal grammar and music theory. And so she was teaching her first course on language teaching as a grad student to get some background on how to do that for her new job and so on. So she was teaching this course this last year. And I made her read Steve's original works from the late 70s and the early 80s. And she comes to me after reading all these things. She's an advocate, so she read them all like one afternoon. And she says, no, truly she did. Not because they were similar like that, but she said, oh my God, she said, I don't understand. She goes, none of this has changed. This is all still true. And so here we are in 2016, someone who's a student of mine discovering or rediscovering, and I can tell you why she wouldn't have read that before. I made her do it. Every student has to do this kind of thing. They have to read S. Corder, Larry Selinger, and Steve Crouch before they get in with me at some point. So anyway, so she says, my God, it's all still true. There's nothing here that we can't say we have empirical evidence for now in 2016. That was a pretty good thing. So I believe what he said. So.
This is about the heritage speakers of the language, the target language. So I'm teaching Spanish, and I've got kids that are heritage speakers, which are the little superstars in the 6th grade Spanish class, because we refer to them for, in Costa Rica, do you say Congo? Mm-hmm, we sure do. And so those kids are typically sometimes moved into an English reading class because their reading skills aren't high enough in English. So this goes to Dr. Krashen yesterday saying that for real learning, we need to have problems that we solve, and we need to be able to write, to solve those problems. So those kids might not have completed the cycle of the building the language brain with all 4 of the language skills. So if that cycle is interrupted, say they move to the United States at age 6, and they don't have reading and writing in their first language, are they ever going to, what happens to their language brain? I want to present a case to the administration that those kids stay in Spanish.
That was about 7 questions at once. So number 1 is the case for early bilingual education. And that is overwhelming. We know that if you give the child good instruction in the primary language, subject matter teaching in the primary language, literacy in the primary language, it helps enormously. Subject matter instruction in the first language makes English more comprehensible. answer. A child with a good background in math who's haven't taken Spanish would be much easier to get it in English, to continue on in English. Literacy, this is classic Frank Smith and Goodman. You learn to read by reading. You learn to read by understanding what's on the page. It's easier to learn to read if you already know the language. And once you can read and it transfers across. Good programs give you literacy in the first language, subject matter in the first language. Good ESL right away, TPRS, they need this, okay? And gradually moving into subject matter, etc. The research is overwhelming. There are no counterexamples. All the studies that compare well-designed bilingual programs with all English, we've won every single one. This is unknown by the popular press. The second half of the argument is, should we worry about continuing the first language? In other words, the issue of heritage language. I'll quote Jim Crawford. There are no disadvantages to keeping the heritage language. There are only advantages. Better communication with the older generation. Better cognitive development. Bilinguals are smarter. Well, it's not true of everybody. I know several counterexamples. And also some job opportunities, etc. So it's good for America. We need bilinguals. There are barriers that are very severe to keeping primary language. Some of you may have experienced this. Let's say you live here in the Chattanooga area and your family are Spanish speakers. And you're the youngest child and the youngest cousin. That means when you speak Spanish at home, as an 8-year-old, you'll sound like someone from Mexico City when you're 5. Slower development because you haven't heard that much. So you make mistakes, what are considered mistakes. Good discussion of mistakes. So let's say that was really interesting. Because it doesn't buy universities. Yeah, very interesting. And how am I doing for your book sales? This is good. Anyway, so let's say what happens to you when you're at a family gathering and you say something in the family language and you make a mistake. How does the family react? Your cousins, your grandfather, they laugh. They ridicule. And they never let you forget it. Remember what you said when you were 9? You know, I'm 32. Give me a break. So what you want to do is stop that cycle. In the cycle of humiliation, you stop using the language. You stop using the language, you get less input, and it gets worse and worse. What do we do about it? Well, I'll tell you what you don't do about it. Take a class in advanced Spanish grammar at the University of Tennessee. I'll tell you what's going to happen. You go to this class, I'm going to sharpen up my grammar, advanced grammar, talk, you get it wrong. The first day is a verb that has not been used in your family for 600 years. Last time it was used by 2 blind poets on a mountaintop in Spain. But you got to know it, okay? So you don't see this again. Okay, so it's like doing English to Anglo-Saxon. So you didn't study too hard for the first quiz. The problem was that they were showing reruns of Sex in the City. And they were finally going to explain how Mr. Big got his name. Turns out that's his name, joking. Anyway. Exactly. So you didn't study for the exam, you get a C+. The gringa sitting next to you, you remember her? Yo puedo también hablar español. You know, she studies really hard and it's an A+. She knows your language. You don't know Krashen's theory. You think this is real. It's bogus knowledge. What's the solution? You need a solution for shy people. So you don't expose yourself. It's called reading. Lots and lots of pleasure reading and lots of good input, movies, TVs, programs that you think are good where you can get lost in the story. Or good heritage classes that focus on topics that are of real interest, not, the golden age over and over again. We are wasting powerful resource and making people's lives miserable.
because I agree with this, I want to let you know that I'm just sitting up here hawking products. I feel like this is QVC. But actually, putting your money where your mouth is one thing I've always liked to do in my life. I have embarked on a new adventure, so we'll be looking for this in January. Most people don't know this, but I'm a heritage speaker of Spanish. And I was the kid one time in a family gathering who said something really embarrassing and got corrected in front of 80 million people from Mexico City who were visiting. I know, I'm still saying a lot of embarrassing things. But anyway, so I have decided that one of the problems with our curriculum is we want to take all that native stuff out there, those quote-unquote authentic texts, and give them to language learners. And I said, no, that's not what we want to do. So I started to take my talents in fiction and move them over to Spanish. And so I started to develop a series of short stories that all are about Latinos in the U.S. And the first one is going to come out in January. It's called Angel. All the central characters are Latino. And they are written so that someone can suck it in your Spanish, can read fiction, and find something in there that speaks to them. And the second story will be coming out. So I'm going to be doing this like a story semester coming out. Because I believe what Steve says is that you've got to put something in their hands that one is engaging, two they can identify with, and that three actually serves the needs of acquisition, which is giving them some language that they can engage with. So be on the lookout for those. You'll like this.
What is the best way to deal with teachers whose target language pronunciation is incorrect? And I'll add to that, what is the best way to deal with students' pronunciation when it is not accurate, not authentic? What do we do with students when they make mistakes grammatically?
Give you a quick hypothesis on pronunciation, which is really a conjecture, sure. It's based on slim evidence. I think the perfect accent is within us. We don't use it because we feel silly. It's not us. So when I meet someone from London, I don't automatically start talking with a British accent. I can. But it would feel like something's not right. I have heard African American English every day my entire life. I can speak it. I don't. You have the language, you have the accent you have because it represents the group you belong to. It's joining the club. What happens when you are slightly underdressed or slightly overdressed? Clothing represents the club you belong to. This is feeling of discomfort, etc. Okay, the flimsy evidence. My accent in French is variable. It depends on how I feel. If I'm alone with a native speaker who thinks I'm an interesting person, my French is pretty good. I've also been told that sometimes I speak French without a trace of a French accent. Earl Steven taught a class in Swahili. The best student, there were 3 students. One student left, the best one. As soon as the best student left, the second student got better. Because that barrier wasn't there, that feeling of embarrassment. Alexander Dior's alcohol study. Let's talk about drugs. Okay, drugs. Okay. Drugs are very interesting. Alcohol is a mind-changing drug. It's an hallucinogen. It's the only hallucinogen, in my opinion, where you do things and you're embarrassed about the next day. That doesn't happen with LSD. I've read about it. Yeah, right. Yeah, it is true. It is true. It lowers what we call the output filter. It makes you send, and they found, a shot of Jack Daniels will improve your accent slightly. A little more, you get sloppy. But what that means is our accents are there for a reason. They are who we are. Let me add to that no one has ever shown that you can acquire a better accent through an accent improvement program. You take the accent of people you want to be a group of. I don't worry about teachers' accents because the kids are not going to identify with the teacher. They're going to identify with the peer group, the people they know. And it doesn't have to be a national group. It doesn't have to be, well,
concerned about is the fact that roughly less than 10% of the students who start learning languages in a secondary language program ever reach any sort of level of measurable proficiency. And how that translates to the broader picture of like advocating for dollars and language programs and things like that. One thing that I've noticed in my class, as I've gotten better at TPRS and teaching with comprehensive input, is that more and more kids feel more and more successful and view themselves as language learners. So for me, a real piece of what I do is about equity and about growing the amount of students, amount of people in our country who value languages and culture. And I wonder if you share that, or if you have any other insights into how we can turn the John D'Amato triangle upside down, right? Or to blow it wide open so that when 100 students start in freshman year, there's 100 students in fifth year, fourth year or fifth year. Can you talk to the potential for equal access and equal opportunity to language acquisition through comprehensive
First thing to do is not vote for people who are against speakers of other languages. But that's easy to say here because none of us would do that, right? Grant, that's a really good question. That's a hard question because embedded in there is the sociology of a culture. So if we deconstruct that question, there can be a number of reasons why learners may not go on, or why things taper off, or why we have an inverted pyramid, not inverted, but we have fewer at the top, and what Grant wants to do is turn the pyramid this way so we have more going on and getting more advanced levels of proficiency, right? So there are reasons to do with society, where the value in languages, to the outcomes. If a student doesn't see what the outcomes are and understands what those outcomes are, and those can be measured and demonstrated, then that speaks to that as well. There's a third issue, which is what happens when they leave your language program and go on to something else. Those of us working in the university system face this all the time with language programs, where we make it proficiency-based and input-based and all these kinds of things, and they get out, and there's nowhere for them to go afterwards if they want to keep contact with language. We try to do things with them, like Steve was talking about earlier, how do you become your own learner? But that's hard for them in the university system because they don't see themselves that way. So there's a number of factors all conspiring in a certain sense that are hard. So we have to figure out what are the different things first that are doing that, and then figure out how we're going to tackle each and every one of those. And those are all contextually defined. It depends on where we are and who we are and what populations we're working with. And I forgot what else I was going to say. I'm having an Alice moment. Everybody see that movie, Alice? Still Alice. That scared me about the language acquisitionist who's starting to lose her mind. That's me sometimes. I'm going to pass this. Where are we? Have we found Dory yet? Where's Dory?
Okay, I think what's going on in foreign language education is scandalous. This could not happen in any other subject matter. First of all, when kids come into beginning classes and they already speak the language, the teacher takes the credit. I have this great student. The only ones, until recently, who make it to the advanced levels are those who had it at home or spent a year in the country. And if you try to go up through the ranks, you can't. It's like going from the warehouse to the office. It never happens. When I took advanced German in college, I had a year in Vienna. And in class was people like me and native speakers. There were a couple of people who came up through the ranks and they were dying. Imagine this happened in chemistry. The only kids that were in chemistry who didn't make it to fourth semester chemistry were the ones who worked as professional chemists for 2 years. This is outrageous, and the profession has allowed this to happen for so many years. TPRS, and I think free voluntary reading, TPRS has been the leader in pushing comprehensible text. Bill's series of stories, I think it's a great idea. That's been a great
to comprehensible input. How are BVP and correction the same and different? If you were going to draw a Venn diagram, what would that look like?
Sometimes there's parts of them that aren't comprehensible, but I watch learners kind of struggle with the meaning, and they have that aha moment. I think, okay, that's a tiny bit of something that they're struggling with, which falls outside their realm of comprehensibility. Might be good for them at that point in time, but overall, I mean, it's all about accessible language, and that's why in my book I talk about level appropriate input. What that means, it's got to be comprehensible. It's got to be something that speaks to the student or the learner at that particular point in time.
No more questions, Your Honor.
How do you feel about authentic resources in the beginning language classroom? I know I want you to say it again.
Anybody got a blood pressure monitor? I've had this running argument with people for more years than I can imagine. I do look good for age. Anyway, so this idea that somehow the classroom itself is not authentic drives me crazy. The classroom is an authentic context, and what you do with your learners during that hour is authentic because you are an actual community of speakers of that language.
I will restate it in less comprehensible terminology. There are two definitions of authentic. One is produced by native speakers for consumption of native speakers, and that's hopeless. It's just too hard. It's ridiculous. So when they say authentic, they're making our job impossible. The other is what Bill Van Patten would call communication. That's what we want. It could be from teacher to non-native speaker, non-native speaker, that doesn't matter.
Because Stephen, I forget to say this, and I actually talk about this in my book. Who in the hell would give a 2.5-year-old a newspaper article from Spain to read? So when you talk to that 2.5-year-old, and that 2.5-year-old's going, Dad, Dad, that's all that kid can say, or maybe 2 words, is that inauthentic? No, that's absolutely authentic for that kid, that age group, and the context of which that kid is operating. Our classrooms are no different. We are authentic, we are real people, with real things we're doing in class, and I'm done.
I had a question for the diva who was giving that number martinis this morning. I was really taken by what you said about communication always having a purpose, either social or informational. My question is, what does a story about giving that number martinis, where does that fit with the communicative purpose?
Let me ask you this question real quick. Did you learn anything about me this morning in that TPRS demonstration? You didn't? Yeah? Is there any reason like martinis, vodka, not gin? What did you found out a bunch of stuff, right? So even though it may not look like there's a purpose, what Katya was doing was getting you to know me, even though some parts of the story we were faking, because that was just what you do in order to keep a level of interest in, it's part of the cycle of developing a story. But look at how much we found out about one particular person in that, So there's a common informational outcome of that kind of thing. But don't forget what I said this morning too, is that not all of language use or interaction falls along this neat continuum or dichotomy between psychosocial and cognitive informational. Sometimes entertainment, because I think about this, I actually talk about this in another thing I wrote, because I do comedy, or student comedy, when a comic is performing, is that comic communicating with the audience? The answer is? Yes. Yes. Okay, but then what is the purpose of that? And the purpose is to entertain. And sometimes if you're, depending on like George Lopez or George Carlin, you actually learn something too. But the purpose is entertain. So it's not clear to me where entertainment falls in all of this. And I have to rethink some of that because that's one of the other areas of communication and language use that I think entertainment kind of bridges or does something between those two. So when I look at a good TPRS lesson where people are enjoying, they're building a story and they are enjoying what they're doing, there's a high entertainment value there. If you're engaged with that entertainment, then you are processing language and you're acquiring language. So we need to rethink what that purpose is for some things, not all things, but for some things. The reason I won't talk about the purposes.
Okay, we're going to take one more question right down here. Last one.
Thank you. Two very quick questions. First one, what is your opinion of online foreign language education, online foreign language teaching? And number two, what is your opinion on the foreign language AP testing, which for me seems to be so high level?
First, I'm going to make my first issue order at lunch. One of my goals in life before I die, which is going to be regrettable, not that I'm accomplished goal that I submit, is that if I could get rid of standardized testing, I would. Just because. And I know there are a lot of people out there who, you didn't get mad at me for saying that, but I'm sorry. The backwash of standardized testing distorts the decisions we make, and the things we need to do. So, in a certain sense, I'm answering your question like AP did by saying that. In terms of online language stuff, how do I want to say this? If the online stuff does what it's supposed to do, it could be a great thing for people who have no access to language other than that time online. Maybe that person can't go to a class, maybe the person can't even speakers, but the online materials do what they're supposed to do in the sense of compelling input, comprehensibility, having learners do the kind of things that help them work their way through the input, then you can actually have a decent, if not a good experience. The problem is most of the online stuff doesn't do that. That's the problem. So it's not the problem of being online or technology, the problem is what people do with it. So I'm not against online stuff, I just think it has to be done right. It's hard to do, but possible.
Again, I'll restate it in comprehensive terms. I think there's great potential in using the computer in general, technology. It's been used very foolishly, very poorly for short-term profits in terms of the theories that don't work. But there are ways of doing it that are extremely inexpensive and simple that provide more comprehensible input. I'll give you some examples. We have started a project, a modest project that we have given a very important sounding name to, called the Great Mandarin Reading Project. Some of the people, Dan and Linda, are here involved with this. We asked TPRS teachers to send us some compositions from written stories in class for their kids write. And as you know, if you're teaching a class of 20 students and they're supposed to write something creative, 3 or 4 of them are going to be as good as anything that you have ever read. There's a lot of creativity. We put them on a website. It's on Ignite Chinese right now, and it's free. And the student's name, the author, and anyone can use it. So we can pile in tons of comprehensible stories that are interesting. So that's number one. Let's get some good stories on the internet. Let's get some good visual input on the internet. Let's take the story that we use for movie talk, and let's to it, good stories. Are you my mother in another language, etc. Free voluntary survey. How about that? Get our intermediates, help them get started in finding topics of interest that they can follow, narrow reading, etc. So these are all inexpensive. In fact, most of them are totally, completely free, and we can provide students with 100 times the amount of comprehensible input that we have now.
And since PDP got a shameless plug, I like to do one too. So all the novels that you see on our board in all the languages are also going to be on our online library. If you've seen the online library already, you'll see that most of the Spanish titles are there. So with that, you'll have interactive activities, listening comprehension, so you can interact in terms of listening and responding. You'll get the audiobook and the text in front of you, so you can get all kinds of comprehensible input on the computer. And I'll reiterate, it's not a substitute for a teacher, and it's not a substitute for human interaction. It's, if that's all you have that can be comprehensible to you at that moment, then why not? It's better than nothing. So, before you applause wildly for our divas up here, I just want to just give you a heads up. I was asked to make a couple of announcements. Number one, the beginning workshop is a continuing strand. Beginners come to the auditorium every day. In the morning, you go to observe learning labs, and you also get to pick a session. Look at the schedule. I believe the first session is beginners observing, and the second session is the beginners get to pick from a menu of options. And in the afternoon, all the beginners are in the auditorium right here with Diana and with Katya. And outside of that, all the experienced people, you select from a menu of options. Tomorrow morning, you pick some sessions. You spend an hour and a half in a learning lab or a language lab, observing master teachers using CI strategies and TPRS. And in the afternoon, you pick sessions and workshops. So with that, I will allow you to now applaud wildly for our divas. This is the only selfie I'm going to get. Somebody quick take a picture. Now it's your turn. Out there, photos with your divas.
Bathroom.
After building your